Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all very much. I am thrilled and delighted to be here, and those of you who have heard me speak before know what I'm about to say, which is, as a native North Carolinian, I am always thrilled to be back in a part of the country, since I now live in New York, where I don't have to explain that men who call their fathers daddy do so out of emotional strength rather than mental deficiency, where that we all know true haute cuisine is a plate of barbecue, a side of hush puppies, a plate of slaw, and a Krispy Kreme donut, and that the three most important words in the English language, especially during March Madness, are anybody but Duke. What I get to say a little less frequently, because it's specific to Atlanta, is it's a special pleasure to be here. My grandfather, Brown, who I found, Ralph Edwards, who is here. We're actually related. We just discovered tonight we're both Browns, going further back. My granddaddy Brown was an Appalachian country doctor in Hendersonville, North Carolina. Applause for Hendersonville. Who delivered his 6,947th baby on his 92nd birthday and was in Ripley's Believe It or Not. And who in 1922 scraped together every dime, nickel, and quarter he had to send my mother, his daughter, to Agnes Scott College. So I grew up hearing stories about Atlanta, about Stone Mountain, and about the world in which she immersed herself, in which she grew. And I had the special pleasure of convening in my prior job the National Association of Professional Theaters in this very site and in this very complex. So Atlanta has always felt like a home to me. Clearly, the Atlanta that we're gathered together tonight to talk about is a very different Atlanta than the one my mother knew. It's now a diverse one in terms of artistic disciplines, organization size, and cultures, from large institutions to small avant-garde work, from traditional work to the experimental, from museums and visual arts and symphonies and operas and chamber music and choir and theater and film and literature and more. And coming from the arts, I, of course, hope that every single one of you in this room has a story to tell about your encounters with those groups. That if I turn to some of you, you'll talk about going up a flight of stairs and turning a corner and seeing an explosion of color in that building right there and feeling that your life has been changed. Or that maybe another time you sat in an auditorium and watched a swan flutter on point from the wings and you felt your life change. Or you were in a darkened auditorium and you heard the ardent throb of an operatic soprano, or the wail of a jazz cornet, or a human voice begin to speak Shakespeare, and your life in some way began to change. Poet Jane Hirshfield, who I really admire, said once, "When you meet your life in a great poem," I think that's a great image, when you meet your life in a great poem, your life becomes expanded, extended, clarified, magnified, deepened in color, deepened in feeling. And whether it's through literature or visual arts, the performing arts or traditional crafts, media or film or more, I hope that every single person in the room has had the experience of meeting your life in a great work of art. Now tonight I could talk for hours about the aesthetics of that and why that's an important thing, but actually I want to talk to you in a different way about why investing in the arts is not just merely an aesthetic pleasure, but is a sign of community building, and what your role as donors is in a moment when the entire arts community is in a moment of fundamental recalibration. Now, when we talk in the arts about why investing in the arts are important, those people who are in the arts field themselves will know and tell you firsthand the economic power of the arts for the local small business communities. We know in community after community, typically every dollar spent on a performing arts ticket leverages an additional $5 or $7 for the local economy. Dollars that are spent at the parking shop, in gift stores. We go to the fabric store to buy the fabrics for the costumes. We hire the sign painters to put up the marquees, the printers to print the programs, the piano tuners to tune the instruments, and more and more. Philadelphia, a town which is only 10% bigger than Atlanta, said in their most recent economic impact study that the arts in Philadelphia now support $3 billion worth of economic activity. They support 44,000 full-time jobs, 80% of which are not arts jobs, but are accountants and construction workers and restaurant workers and lawyers and bartenders and more. And in community after community, what we know is if the arts are supported, the entire small business community is going to feel the afterglow. And if the arts are imperiled, the small business community will feel the aftershocks as well. Now, those of you who have children will know firsthand the power of the arts around education. And for more than a decade, Those of us in the arts have pointed with pride to a woman named Shirley Bryce Heath from Stanford University, who was hired to study all forms of after-school activity, Boy Scouts and sports teams and church groups and arts activities and more. Shirley Bryce Heath, who is a sociologist and not an arts person, came back astounded at the end of that and said, I didn't expect to find that, but it's the arts programs that have by far the most dramatic impact. What I've discovered is it's the kids in the arts programs who subsequently are 4 times more likely to run for class office, who are 4 times more likely to participate in math and science fairs, who are 8 times more likely to graduate from high school than their non-arts colleagues, who show major drops in disciplinary infractions, greater attendance, and greater classroom participation. An MIT study has shown that kids that study Shakespeare have greater complexity of thinking, greater verbal acuity, greater tolerance of ambiguity, greater self-esteem, and greater self-confidence. And in community after community, what we know from kids is that the arts teach discipline, teamwork, higher motivation, and a special power in offering non-violent alternatives for kids for self-expression and activity, especially in underprivileged and challenged neighborhoods. And others of us will say the arts are fundamental to building a community. Whether they help us overcome traditional barriers of race or class that all too often keep us apart. Whether we do that by watching groups that change our opinions, or whether we make art ourselves. I don't think it's accidental that we used to begin every March for Equality by singing together, singing "We Shall Overcome," or that we would begin every war protest by singing together when we sang "Blowin' in the Wind," or when we gather for a sports team, we sing the Star-Spangled Banner, because making art together makes instant community. And was I the only person who, after Columbine, read in those accounts from the students in Denver that they said repeatedly, the only place on this campus we could have a conversation, the only place we came together, the only place we were a community as opposed to divided cliques was the Performing Arts Center. You know, for all of these reasons, we get to stand up and say, if you care about an economically vibrant Atlanta, you must care about the arts. If you care about the educational achievements of your children in Atlanta, you must care about the arts. If you care about a diverse, inclusive, holistic Atlanta, you must care about the arts. It would be disingenuous of me, however, to stand before you and say that the arts are in a strong and confident moment in this country. In the wake of the economic downturn, which is frequently where our conversations begin, individual giving to the arts plummeted, foundation giving fell. The foundation where I work lost $800 million overnight. Our giving fell by 1/3. That was the average depletion in 2008 for foundations nationwide. And corporate giving for the arts has entered free fall. Arts groups all over the country have downsized, they have eliminated benefits, they have downscaled their productions. Goodbye Shakespeare, you got a monologue, you got a play with no actors, even better yet. All in an attempt to simply stay alive, which too many even fail to make that test. But frankly, for our purposes of exploring what our role is, I have to suggest that the challenges we face as an arts community are not primarily economic. You know, in 2006, 2 years before the economic downturn, the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, where I work, gathered more than 700 managers and artists and administrators in 22 meetings in 14 cities across the United States. We had one basic question, which is, what's keeping you up at night? What's your life like that makes life a challenge or a struggle from you? And 2 years before the economic downturn, I was hearing a level of anxiety and uncertainty and fear unlike any I had heard in my more than 30 years of working in the arts in this country. 2 years before the economy fell, we were hearing about the erosion of audiences, falls in single ticket sales, falls in subscription, the rise of what we call churn or audience turnover. If you're at a dance concert, for example, in this country, anywhere in this country, and you look around you, 75% of the people in that audience are coming for one night of the year and they won't be back. An astounding number when you think how many people have to filter through an auditorium just to make the numbers balance in a given year. We already heard in 2006 that audiences were overscheduled and exhausted. 42% of men and 55% of women said, I am too tired to do the things I want to do. And when we said in polls, okay, so what do you look forward to on a free night? The number one answer was not going to the theater or going to the ballet or going to the movies or even having dinner with friends. The number one answer was, I'm going to get a good night's sleep. Not surprisingly, after decades of growth, our audiences were plummeting. And our declines in attendance, in tandem with rises in fixed costs of labor and lumber and health insurance and more, meant escalating ticket prices that threatened to put the arts outside of the reach of so many in our communities we want to reach and serve. Moreover, we heard in those same conversations 2 years before the economy fell the disorienting impact of technology. You know, I remember when the internet first appeared, we all thought, oh, hallelujah, it's the answer to our advertising problems. And now what we realize, if anything, it's too efficient. Depending on who you read, a typical American, any one of us in the audience, now sees between 5,000 and 7,000 different marketing messages every single day. An astounding number when you think what it's like to get people's attention. Technology, in fact, is our biggest competition for leisure time. By the time she graduates from college, a typical college senior will have spent 20,000 hours online, an additional 10,000 hours playing video games, a reminder that video games in this country now outsell music and movie recordings combined and are reviewed in the arts and culture section of the New York Times. And online leisure time consumption has grown 50% in the last 3 years alone. Thanks to the internet, we now think we can get anything we want, any time of day, delivered to our front doorsteps. I can order jeans at 5 in the afternoon or 3 in the morning. They are cut to my body. They're on my doorstep within 24 hours. Expectations of personalization, customization, and convenience that the arts, which have a set curtain time, a set venue, inconvenience of having to travel and park and the like, simply cannot reach. And what's it going to mean in 10 years when we say to a young person, that symphony, opera, ballet ticket, $75, $100, $125, when that young person is used to downloading culture on demand 24/7 for 99 cents a song or for free? These are enormous questions. But we're not alone. These are the same questions that have are decimating the newspaper industry, that had decimated Borders books, that laid waste to Tower Records, that are killing Barnes & Noble and more. We are in a fundamental recalibration of culture and communications in this country. And everyone I know in the arts resonates to the world of poet Adrienne Rich when she writes, we are out in a country that has no language, no laws. Whatever we do is pure invention. The maps they gave us are out of date by years. And aren't you glad you all invited me here to brighten your day? You know, it's a confusing time. And I'm an occasional student of history, and a sort of clarifying moment happened for me at a conference in New York 4 years ago when somebody in the audience raised their hand and said, what if this moment for the arts is the equivalent of the religious Reformation? What if we are in the middle of the arts Reformation? I thought, boy, that's a really interesting question. You know, if you know your history, you know that the religious Reformation was made possible because of reinvention of technology. The printing press was invented. Suddenly anybody could own a Bible. You put something on the door in Germany, it could be mass-produced and on the door in France 2 years later. And God knows we are right now in the midst of a fundamental technological revolution and a redistribution of knowledge. The religious Reformation upended and obliterated dominant old business models. As Russell Willis Taylor, who's head of National Art Strategies, has said more than once, the religious Reformation was a great time to be a land buyer and a rotten time to be a monastery. And on some level, I think we have to look within our arts organizations and ask ourselves, is the orchestral model, for example, potentially the monastery of today? But more powerfully, I think, the Reformation at its very core raised the question, why do I need intermediation to have a divine experience? Why do I need a priest to intercede for me with God? A question that's finding a direct parallel today as people say, why do I need to have a professional artist to have a creative experience? Just as the religious Reformation redefined where religion would operate, how religion would operate, with whom it would operate, offering fantastic new possibilities for new denominations, new practices, new rituals, new roles for clergy, new ways the layperson could take their own responsibility for their own religious destiny, we are seeing an explosion of new practices in the arts field. We are seeing managers and artists make fantastic new paths where none have been before. They are redefining our aesthetic vocabularies with fantastic ways, even while they are challenging the presumed ability of traditional arts institutions to set the cultural agenda. Now, some people confuse that and think I'm saying, well, the great symphonies, the museums, and the theaters are over. And please understand me, that's not what I'm saying at all. The religious Reformation was not the end of the Catholic Church, a church that is deeply, deeply meaningful to millions worldwide. And our best institutions will continue to thrive and flourish as they too offer spiritual value to their adherents wherever they are. That said, I think they're likely to be fewer in number and less likely to command the lion's share of the philanthropic resources. And so I think all forward-thinking arts organizations now are asking themselves, what if our mission can no longer merely be to produce artwork, but what if our mission will in the future be social orchestration? Bringing communities together, an orchestration in which the performance or the exhibit is a piece, but only a piece of what we're called to do. What if our role is no longer to make experiences to be consumed, but to provide experiences to audiences that will be springboards to their own creativity? What would we do differently if we stopped thinking of ourselves as arts institutions and started thinking of ourselves as platforms designed to aggregate creative energy? These organizations, I think, at their very core are rethinking how, with whom, where, with what support, and even why the work is made. And we are, in short, I think, entering a chapter of expanded possibilities. Because even while arts attendance continues to erode, arts participation, people writing their own songs, singing their own music, making their own films. Show me a 14-year-old who's not hard at work on her second, third, or fourth movie. Arts participation is exploding at an exponential rate. A promise for us which means that we may not be in a Reformation. We may be on the brink of a Renaissance. And just as the Renaissance was a renegotiation of old ideas to reach a new reality, dependent on a few hand-select generation of donors, the great de Medicis foremost among them, donors who wish to reshape and ensure the perpetuation of the arts for their communities and their children. This new arts reformation and renaissance will depend on an enlightened circle of donors if we are to survive. Now, in this expanded sense, I'll get to the money about what that means, but before, I want to say, first of all, donors donate more than just money. Donors donate, in their most enlightened sense, energy and counsel and wisdom. And real arts activist donors volunteer for board service and offer their best counsel. They lobby city officials, they go on funding calls, they know that in a time when the arts are imperiled on the funding agenda, and I can tell you this from being at the NEA. I was at the NEA, which was mentioned. I was there during Mapplethorpe, Serrano, and the NEA 4, if that means anything to anybody, a very difficult time. What we knew is when the arts are in trouble, the voice of the artist is perceived as too self-interested to be heard. And it's the bank president, it is the lawyer, it is the realtor, it is the stay-at-home mom whose voices are heard when the arts professional's voice cannot be. And the great donors donate their voice to the cause. Great donors give their energy and counsel to take children with them every time they go to a theater or an exhibit, unless there's a reason, content-wise, to leave them at home. Probably if I asked you why you love the arts, for those of you that do, 95% of you would talk specifically about an encounter you had with the arts before the age of 18. We know that if we don't get you by 18, we're probably never going to get you at all. And you go probably for two reasons. Your parents took you, or you watched them go for their own pleasure, and you had a friend who went. Better yet, an arts donor donates time and counsel to take a kid and a kid's friend, ensuring the arts for the long term. And of course, donors give generously financially. They give generously every year, and they increase their gifts with every year, as virtually, probably all of you have already done. And yet they encourage others to give as well, knowing that it's not give or get, it's give and get, and that we're at a threshold where we can expand our influences. Seeking support for the arts at this moment asks us to be our most creative, because let's face it, the arts funding landscape right now is shifting. Some of you may know, for example, Kickstarter, which is a website where artists post small projects and have little thermometers like we used to see on the United Way, and will ask people to donate. Many people donating $5, $10, $15 to help an artist give. What started merely 4 years ago as somebody's nice idea about how to support a few select projects, last year gave more money to the arts than the entire National Endowment for the Arts budget, which shows us how Kickstarter and electronic giving has changed. Some of you may flock there. Some of you may give very generously, as I hope you do, and use your circle of influence to do more. You know, one of the great inspiring stories I ever saw in this regard was Steppenwolf Theater, where I used to attend every year their gala. And Steppenwolf Theater, 10 years ago, has one of its members, a man named John Mahoney. Those of you who know Frasier, the television series, will recognize John Mahoney as playing Martin Crane, Frasier's father, if some of you know that television series. Every year at the gala, they would auction off a walk-on Frasier. It came with 2 first-class airline tickets to Beverly Hills, a suite at the Beverly Hilton, etc. And if you were the person who was lucky enough to bid and get the walk-on, the camera, if you were standing on the set, the camera went, and that was your walk-on. The year I was there, the first year I was there, it went for $78,000. And when I said, oh my God, who is that man that bought it? The Steppenwolf people turned to me and said, this gets better. This man is the CEO of a major corporation here in Chicago, and he's bought the walk-on every year for the last 4 years, and every year the price tag goes up. What they said was really great about it, though, is he's never done the walk-on. Every year he holds an essay contest in his corporation about why the arts are important, and the employee who writes the best essay gets the walk-on. A way in which donors not only leverage their checkbooks, but they leverage their sphere of influence as well. And the great donors, I think, encourage us, hand in hand with what religion does so well, to cultivate always the next generation of philanthropists. I'm sure as I'm standing here that part of the reason I'm in the business that I'm in is that going to the First Presbyterian Church in High Point, North Carolina, I was expected to tithe out of my allowance every week in those collection envelopes. And from the age of 5 on, I understood not only the necessity, but the reward of giving to others if I had the means to do so. In this conversation, I have to say this is also the time that we need, as a philanthropic community, foundations and donors alike, to reframe the entire philanthropic exchange. And I say this with all due respect. As arts funders, we have inadvertently encouraged a poverty mentality. We have asked people to budget to zero in grant applications, and we have used the prospects of a surplus as justification to cut their grants. We have woefully underinvested in their infrastructure and their personnel, and we give them 1 or 2 year grants at most and expect dramatic and seismic organizational change when all of us who have read Good to Great and those corporate books know that anything of significance in an organizational culture takes a minimum of 5 years to achieve. Now is the time that we have to stand back from how we have funded and shift our gaze from short-term projects and build long-term organizational capacity, to build the muscle to undertake change again and again and again, especially in this time when the arts are walking into a terrain for which the answers are unknown. Helping organizations develop that long-term capacity, both capital-wise and structure-wise, will be critical to their success. And it's time that we must stop supporting mere cosmetic success and start rewarding depth of thinking, clarity of values, and real power of learning, even at the price of always knowing that this will involve rightly funding failure. Always a necessity if true innovation is to succeed and change will happen. And the reason we need to do this is not just because we need the arts. The reason we need to do this is for a healthier Atlanta, Because however important the arts have been, they are going to be more important in the decades to come. The arts are going to be more important economically as creative industries continue to explode. Think about the growth of the iPad and technology and website, the emergence of the computer gaming industry, none of which people my age even imagined a decade or a decade and a half ago. And even for businesses that are not directly creatively informed, as we move to more consensual modes of decision-making, the primary characteristic of leadership will be emotional intelligence, the ability to inspire, to coordinate, to empathize, to bring people together, to listen and cooperate, the very things we instill every time we take the stage in the arts. The arts are going to be more important educationally if we let it. The traditional emphasis on math and science, however valuable, by themselves do not promote the integrated left brain, right brain thinking that the future demands. A difference that Mike Huckabee has said, if we just have math and science only education without the arts, we're making a database without a server. The arts are going to be more important as we move to a plurality nation. Francois Matarazzo has observed that the arts let people present themselves to the majority, to be the subjects of their own characterizations rather than the objects of characterizations by others. And especially now, when we're encouraged through ways to view one another with hostility and fear and suspicion, the arts offer us another way. You know, I've been reading Peter Coleman's book called The 5% recently, where he talks about intractable problems. He says, you know, there are problems we get stuck in and we can't find our way out. We're stuck in the Middle East. We are stuck in the abortion's right debate. We are potentially, if you look to Washington, D.C. right now, stuck in issues around tax reform and gun control, perhaps. So he calls these intractable problems, and he says debates, typically, of all debates, 5% will get mired in this intractable moment. And when he said, what is it those things have in common? He said they share three things. He said they are characterized by a competition, win-lose, winner-take-all dynamic. They oversimplify complex issues. And they are characterized by people who surround themselves with self-reinforcing feedback loops that reinforce their initial point of view no matter what else has been said in the interim. Potentially as apt a description of the 116th Congress of the United States as any as I've ever heard. You know, I really think on some level, the arts, if we're thoughtful about this, are an alternative to intractability. Because instead of focusing on competition, we promote cooperation. Instead of oversimplification, we stand for nuance and subtlety and shades of meaning. Instead of gathering people to reinforce our feedback loops, we at our best gather people who are not like ourselves to look at their fellow human being with generosity and curiosity. If we've ever needed that capacity in human history, we need it now. You know, I'm going to close with a story that brings us full circle to that explosion of color. And this one comes from Fred Adams, who for many years was the artistic director of the Utah Shakespeare Festival. Fred, as a Mormon, would tell many people about the 2 years he spent ministering the story of the Latter-day Saints, where he was assigned to rural Scandinavia, not to Uganda, for those of you who have seen Book of Mormon. He said he was assigned to rural Finland, where the combination of language barrier and darkness and cold made the experience dispiriting, often to say the least. And he said in a region where it could be dark before 3 p.m., there were many days they would knock on the door, they would get blank looks at the story of the Mormons, they'd be invited inside and offered mysteriously prepared alcohol and oddly prepared fish. He said several days of this were pretty bad, but months of this got to be really bad. And one day in particular, it was especially cold, it was especially wet, he was especially tired, and he had never been angrier or more upset or more frustrated. And as they were struggling up the bank of the fjord or whatever, he had never felt that his life was more futile and less without meaning. And in the midst of trudging up, his companion grabbed his sleeve and pulled it frantically and said, Fred, look up, look up. And Fred said, and he looked up, and there above them in the night sky was the Aurora Borealis, the northern lights, shimmering and exploding in color, reminding us of the infinite mystery of which we're just but a glimmer. Fred always said, that's what we do in the arts. We say to people, look up. Yes, times are hard. Yes, we can be angry. Yes, we can despair. But we have a choice to work as we must, to give as we must, to build and shape our communities one child at a time, one audience at a time, one community at a time. In all of those ways, your work in supporting the arts is not merely an aesthetic pleasure. Your work is a form of civic activism at its highest level. I'd like to thank all of you for being great civic activists for your part in supporting the arts here in Atlanta. I'd like to assure you that the hand of the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation is extended to you in friendship, both now and for years to come. And I'd like to thank you for your kindness and your generosity in asking me to be here with you this evening. Thank you all, and Godspeed.